everybody. Welcome back to the Music Buds podcast. This is episode number 40, and my name is Henry. This week, I'm honored to be joined by the BAFTA-winning composer Simon Hale, known partly for his work on the Rockstar video game Noire. Simon, thank you very much for taking the time to talk. As I've said to you before, I really have enjoyed your work for a long time, so thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. Well, how's life for you these days?
Well, at the moment in the beginning of 2021, it's not great for anybody, really. It's such a tough time for our industry and everybody involved in it. I mean, I do, or did, and hopefully will do again, quite a lot of work in the recording industry and a lot of work in theatre, both of which are having a really, really, really tough time. And it's just so tragic seeing all of our colleagues and everybody just not having any work, and the prospects of going back. I don't know what it's like in the US, but over here it's every time you kind of think, I mean, we're nearly a year in now since last March, everything closed down. And then the talk at that point was, well, we should be okay by June, July kind of time, you know. And then, of course, it just keeps getting pushed back, and no prospect at all of when live shows, whether music or theatre or whatever they might be, are likely to come back with a vengeance. That said, you know, they will come back, and hopefully when they do, it really will be a strong process. I think everyone wants just to get out and be normal, and do stuff, you know. But of course, you know, we all have to be sensible. We've all got ourselves to look after, our colleagues, our families, our parents, and everyone else. We have to try and get on top of this and ride it a little bit. But it's a tough time. So, you know, it's fine. I mean, I'm lucky to be at home. We've got space. We're all safe, and you know, enjoy being with the family and not having to travel around. But it is just tough artistically. I mean, you catch me on a day where a full day of a theatre show development on video chat today, which was great. Sort of about 12 people all talking about various different things, what we would do, and ideas for moving the story forward. So, you know, it's really inspiring to have that. But days like that are few and far between, because at the moment, you know, if there's no work, and every time anyone talks about anything, it's, well, we hope this will happen then. But of course, who knows? Mm-hmm. Anyway, I don't want to be completely negative about it.
No,
if anyone listens to this in the future going, wow, what did happen in that time? That's really
capture
a strange
moment
period
in history.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we're all living through it and having to deal with it and look forwards, you know, because, I mean, you know, it's a tough industry to be involved in anyway. And now looking at, you know, all the folks in their 20s, I just think, whoa, it's so hard to see how you're going to be able to make a career. It's funny, we were just watching a little bit of a program all about Laurel Canyon, which is showing us like a two-part thing. And it's just fascinating talking about, you know, the Byrds and Joni Mitchell. And when they were there in the 60s. And of course, if you go to LA, I've been, you know, a few times, and you go to places like that where it's expensive and hip and it's only just down the road. The reason everyone used to live there is because it was cheap. But of course, you know, it doesn't look like that now. This really Gigi area. Well, not necessarily Gigi, but you know what I mean. So it's just kind of at that point in the early 60s, it was just where the musicians used to hang out, because you could stay there and it was convenient for everything else. Fascinating how times change.
Yeah. No,
anyway, I've got off topic a little bit on your question.
No, you're totally fine. Yeah, I mean, I'm in North Carolina right now, and it's really the same way. It's, you know, everything is shut down, you know, and there's people, you know, keep on saying, oh no, it'll be back by, you know, April, you know, June, whatever.
Exactly.
Not looking that way, you know, sadly.
No, it's not. But of course, you know, you do need to offer hope and
of course,
and optimism towards what might happen. But I suspect you're right that I think each time we're probably looking at summer, early autumn, fall for things to really be back. And hopefully it will be then.
Yeah.
A very old friend of mine from school lives in Raleigh, actually. So that's
oh, cool.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm only about 45 minutes from Raleigh. So that's pretty close. Well, I guess the first question I wanted to ask, how was it that you got started with music? Was being a, you know, composer amongst some of your other roles, is that something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, I guess it is. I've had, you know, piano lessons and violin lessons as a kid. My grandfather was a professional saxophonist, actually. So he used to, all his life was, you know, doing shows, gigs. He was a jazz player and used to do all sorts of things. And in fact, my dad says he had a particularly fine performance of playing the xylophone with 8 mallets. Yes, that's 4 in each hand. After he'd had a couple of beers, I suspect, on a Saturday night, and used to do this party piece. Goodness knows what it sounded like. But anyway, so music's always been in the family. I've just always just did it. It was just something that I did. I mean, I have perfect pitch, so which for people listening is not something that you learn. Mm-hmm. You obviously get quicker when you learn the names of the notes in terms of Western harmony anyway. But it's something that your brain does or doesn't do. It's quite a rare thing. But there must be plenty of people walking around who have it, who don't know they have it, who are not musicians. I've just learned that we call this thing F sharp or D flat or whatever it is. And it's weird because your brain just goes, it's like a color. No, I mean, it doesn't feel like a color to me, but it's the same sort of principle. If I was to show a banana, apologies for my English pronunciation there, banana, no. to anyone in the world, you say, what color is that? They go, well, yellow. Or a lemon, well, it's yellow. What colour is the sky? Blue. Well, that's a little more varied, I suppose. But still, it's obvious. You don't think about that. In the same way that if you can read a language and I show you a word, you go, well, it says exit or whatever the word says. You can't not let your brain do that. It just happens automatically. So for me, I'll go, that's C sharp. Or even more complicated, you might go, that's D flat major 7. Huh. And it's got the C on the top, because you learn your brain just hears those things. It's very, very obvious, and it sounds like you're being clever, but you're not really. It's just you've learned what they're called.
Right.
So I'm sure that there are people, similar disciplines in architecture or literature, whatever, where people just get it, and you can just, or even mechanics. People who listen to an engine go, oh, the third cylinder's misfiring, whatever it might be. That would mean nothing to me, but they would just know, because you can just tell. So that's always been with me. So I've always just understood music and just enjoyed it. And I just played in bands at school, although I'd studied and learned in a fairly typical classical, if you like, way through, reading music, playing it, and then going through a series of grades, certainly in the UK. I then was always interested in other kind of stuff, listening to records, playing in bands at school, as well as playing in string quartets and whatever else it might be. Went to come down to London to do a degree in music, which I did, and then graduated after 3 years of that. And at that point, I left and went to join playing bands on tour as a keyboard player, which I did for a long time. Then I'd always wanted to sort of be me. Now, this sounds a little bit nebulous, but what I mean is, rather than somebody saying, we're looking for a keyboard player or a composer or a whatever it might be, that I'd always like to think that somebody's asking me to do something because of what I do, what I can bring to it, which isn't necessarily X, Y, or Z, but it's just, or Z, it's just something that is individual and personal. And hopefully special, but I mean, you just don't know. That's not for me to say. So writing has become a way for me to find that particularly, because I spent a lot of time working as a keyboard player and in bands and doing sessions where you're playing for other people. But I always wanted to bring myself to those things rather than being a gun for hire kind of thing. So I've really found that through writing, whether it's arranging, orchestrating, composing, whatever it might be, you're still sitting by yourself thinking about the musician who's going to produce a sound for you. What am I looking for? What sound am I looking for? What's the effect I want? How do I communicate that to the person who will then translate that into audio? And that relationship is really special, actually. It's funny, that's kind of dawned on me over the last sort of 10, 15 years, I think, that the relationship between writer and performer is a very, very complicated, deep one. And it's not spoken at all because, if you're dealing with notated music, you've got a piece of paper, black and white paper, which makes no sound in itself, but it communicates instructions, if you like, and a dialogue to the person at the other end of it. And it's not just a question of you do this and I'll be happy. It's just a question of this is what I am explaining. I'm trying to communicate to you. And if you understand what's on that, you'll go, oh, I see what you mean. And then the musician plays. Now, what's fascinating about that and also with work in film or record or theatre, where I'm not necessarily going to meet the musicians who are playing, you have to find a way to communicate that very, very succinctly, but also very, very obviously, in that somebody goes, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Mm. Rather than going, so did you want these notes long or short? Or is this swung, or is this aggressive or passive, or whatever it might be? You have to find a way to be clear with your expressions. And I found that really fun. In fact, theatre is an interesting concept because, of course, a show then, if it runs for however long it runs, the music is on those stands being played 8 times a week by, well, hopefully when they come back, by different musicians who somebody may come into sub one night and sight read the whole show. It happens a lot, you know. So, of course, with a good reader and good music, there's no reason you can't do that. But you need to make sure that what's in front of them is completely coherent and obvious, rather than, it wasn't clear what you wanted. So I might put things in the part which are unconventional, shall we say, but to express a purpose. I'm trying to think. I did one show that on the drum part, there was a big number at the end of Act 1. And it had a drum groove that I wrote, 2 bars and then just wrote a squiggly line and sim, so people just kind of carried on the groove. That's all fairly standard thing. After 8 bars, I wrote fill because, you write a drum fill, that's fine, nothing revolutionary at all. Right. Carried on the groove. But then after 16 bars, brace yourself, this is not the funniest thing in the world, but it's quite interesting in terms of the psychology. Sure. After 16 bars, it then said Phil Collins. So I spelt Phil, F-I-L-L, and Collins. And of course, any drummer, any person in the world is going to get that joke. Yeah. Because also the piece itself suited the famous In the Air Tonight drum fill. So what's funny about that is it's going to put a smile on somebody's face. If they're sight reading that chart, they can put, oh, okay, right, check this out. And they'll play something. And it doesn't really matter in terms of the world of music. But it's a nice little thought that there's a relationship there that is unspoken. Yeah. And I may never meet those people, quite probably. But it's still going to put a smile on somebody's face and go, oh, yeah, I get what you mean. You get me, I get you. And it's a nice little dialogue because music is a beautiful thing. It's art that we're making in whatever shape or form. It's not dry. It's got life and soul and depth and everything else. So I always like to think that if the musician can see what they've got to play, understand that relationship between writer and performer, it's a lovely symbiotic thing then, and it sounds better, and it's a very interesting concept. So to go back to your question, I do apologise for being.
Oh, you're fine.
Gnashing on because I was interested thinking about it.
No.
So I then, when I was playing, actually, I was on tour for a long time with Seal, the British artist, playing keyboards with him, and got to the end of that, and I thought, I want to write my own music. I want to do something for me, because I'd always kind of shied away from that, thinking, oh, well, I'm a musician, not a writer, and, that kind of all those insecurities and doubts that artists have. So anyway, I wrote a piece of music, made a record, got some people together, recorded it, didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to do it. And anyway, made this record and then played it to various colleagues and friends, at which point then a friend of mine called Bluey, who runs a band called Incognito, or a kind of jazz fusion band in the UK, phenomenal group, actually, going for nearly 40 years now, absolutely wonderful. Wow. And he commissioned me to write some string arrangements then on an album in 1995, which I did. And then the contractor, who's the fiddle player then, a guy called Gavin Wright, heard it and he went, oh, this is really great, So, and then he called me up and said, listen to this record. I'm putting your name forward for a couple of records. You'll hear from this guy called J.K. Jamiroquai, and from Björk, and also, this is all in 1996, I remember it, and from a guy called Duncan Sheik. So that all happened in that 1 year. So I did strings with Duncan's first record, which, of course, ultimately then led to Spring Awakening, which then led to all the theatre work I've done through that one connection. Wow. So it's fascinating how, really what I did by recording the album was I changed my career from being a keyboard player to being me as a writer in whatever guise that might be. Yeah. So it's fascinating, actually, to think. And now I find myself doing a lot of theatre, but really enjoying that creative process with a great bunch of people and writing for real people, playing real music on music stands, which is what I really enjoy.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, I want to ask about LA Noire, but with theater, I mean, and you described it briefly. What is it about theater that has drawn you back so much over the years? Because it seems like you've worked on quite a lot of theater over the years.
I have, by chance, exactly. Spring Awakening was 2006, and then I did a production of Company over here, and then Women on the Verge with David Yazbek was 2011. So then things have just kind of, I guess, you just get known in a world. Mm-hmm. And then particularly having done Girls from the North Country over here 3 years ago, or just over 3 years ago, that's then, of course, all because it's Bob Dylan, everyone's sort of very aware of him and having done his music in a very different context and making it sound like a very different beast has turned people's heads a little bit as well. So that's really interesting and of course, the great thing about theatre is, in my experience, is there's nobody ever says, no, you can't. It's all a question of, well, let's see. You might say, I've got a really crazy idea here. And they go, okay, let's hear it. And whatever it might be, it doesn't mean it'll make the grade or go past anything else. But it's a very open, creative business where I feel that people are always up for anything. Mm-hmm. And if you say, I'm thinking of using a didgeridoo and a kazoo here, they're going to go, okay, sounds wacky, but let's give it a go. No, you can't necessarily, I mean, this is a bit broad brush, but making a record is a slightly different discipline in that you have lots of parameters which are existing, the length of the song, the context of the artist and their genre and their sort of style. You have to try and be appropriate to that. It doesn't mean you can't be creative and push boundaries, because of course you always can. But I think it's a little bit more understood what it is you're trying to do. Whereas in theatre, of course, it's just about telling the story at whichever point you are in a show. And if you think, I think this will do it, then people will listen to you. And they might not agree, and that's fine. So it's a really creative process. I mean, that said, doing a production does take up a lot of time, a lot more time than working on a record does, in terms of what I do. So it's quite much, a lot more of a commitment to put yourself into that. But that's a lovely process to be in. And all of course, coming towards an opening in a venue on a particular time where all the personnel and the creative team and the performers and the company and the backstage crew and front of house, they're all in the same place at the same time. A bit like going on tour with a band in that you have, you rehearse, the band rehearse, then you have production rehearsals, then you go on. And at that point, when you get in front of an audience for the first time, that's that same thing. Mm-hmm. So that's really special, actually. Yeah, it's really special. And so that's how my theatre connection came around, and I do love it.
And is it partly? I mean, one of the reasons I enjoy theatre is because it is different every single time.
Yeah, that's it. That's a really interesting point, actually. I totally with you on that one. I think sometimes there can be a trend. For shows that have a lot of pre-programmed material or running off click a lot, and for various different reasons. And hey, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a big world out there. But I do love the fact that with live theatre, you just go, I don't know what this is going to be like. You get to 7:30, 8 p.m., the lights go down, the curtains open, metaphorically or otherwise, and something happens. It's going to happen. If you're an audience member or on stage, it's special. There's an energy there, which is exciting and exhilarating because, you're telling a story or being told a story, whichever side of the stage you're on. And it's special because it's really happening. Yeah. And I think unlike cinema or a record, which is both recorded mediums, which are both phenomenal outputs of art, obviously, but it's a different process. This is something, if you're late, you miss the beginning with a show. But you're there as you're part of something really individual. Actually, just to go slightly sidetracked, I can tell you about a little project. You always edit this down.
That's okay. It's all right.
My father was a radio producer for many, many years. He used to do lots of interviews of various artists with a quarter-inch tape and a razor blade. I don't, you've ever seen what that looks like on YouTube? You're far too young to have done it yourself, I'm sure.
No, I've been through the schooling to see that stuff.
There you go. Yeah. But it was fascinating because I'd see him do stuff, and he'd end up around his neck. He'd have all these little bits of tape, because that would be a word here, not syllables necessarily, but certainly a phrase that I'm just trying to lose some time on this. I've got to cut that out, but I'll keep it just in case I need to put it back in again. And of course, you'd have to join it together with sticky tape and check that it didn't glitch. I mean, you wouldn't want to go back to those days for those logistics, that's for sure. But still a fascinating way to see how it worked. Anyway, my point is, I did some shows years ago with a band called the Bays, B-A-Y-S. They're a British band, and they do dance music in an overall context. I mean, it could be, trance, disco, whatever it might be, all sorts of different things. And they started off, their music is entirely improvised. So they'd go and do a show, they'd turn up, and there was a drummer, bass player, two kind of keyboard player / DJs, and that was their basic core setup. And they'd start and they'd play, they'd just jam effectively. They'd see how the audience reacted and they'd respond to that. It would have a whole dynamic shape through the performance. Fascinating. Anyway, the drummer is a very old friend of mine. He rang me up and said, I want to do some shows with the Bays, but with a live orchestra. So I went, but you don't rehearse. There's no music. It's not written. You just get up. And I said, how are you going to do that? I said, yeah, I'm kind of phoning you to sort of ask the same question. I said, well, I don't know. Anyway, it turns out that me and another arranger-composer called John Metcalf, who's a fantastic musician, we ended up writing the music for the orchestra in the shows live on stage. So you'd get up on stage and the orchestra there, they all had electronic screens in front of them. It's a few years ago we did the first one. And their screen was a clone, a video clone of what John and I were doing, writing straight into software. So then we had a conductor who acted like a kind of traffic cop, I guess, where he would work people around the roundabout or the junction to say, okay, play here, repeat that bit, stop, now you play this, and that kind of thing. And he could see what we were doing on the screens, and he'd then direct people. We'd write in sort of small cells, if you like, 4-bar, 8-bar type bits of music, and we'd label them with rehearsal numbers. So the conductor could go, okay, directing with his hand signals or whatever to number 3, number 4, loop, octave up, octave down, that kind of stuff. But basically, we'd go on stage and nothing would exist. So the whole show would then just happen. You'd be writing live for the orchestra as quickly as you possibly could.
Yeah. So
that then the conductor would then direct them to play it. And they would then play this music, which hadn't existed in any way, shape or form until seconds before. Wow. So the reason I mention it is because for the whole, apart from it being an amazing concert, the whole audience were there and they knew that nobody else in the world would ever hear that again because that was it. You were there for that. And I'm not saying it was brilliant or terrible. It's neither here nor there. I mean, it's up to you as an observer to think that. But what was special is that you knew you were the only people in that room who were witness to that particular thing, that bit of stuff, which is really special. And interestingly, people say, "Oh, did you record it?" Nobody didn't record anything because actually, it's not the point. It's all about being there. I guess a bit like seeing, Hendrix at the Troubadour on whatever night it was. That show, that one-off, would never ever be repeated. Yeah. And he might play something he never played again, or Dylan, or whoever it might be. So there's something really special about those kind of things. And theatre, although it's much more designed and created in a specific way, you're right in that you go and see a performance and it's different. Well, hopefully. It's a shame to think if it's always going to be the same. But you want to see something special and feel like you're part of something. I think that's really very important experience to watching art.
Yeah, and it's almost the same thing with like a rock concert or something,
Sure.
Whereas obviously nowadays everybody's filming it one way or the other, but in a way at least, you're still there, and it's no one else outside of that arena is going to experience it the same way you do. So
no, absolutely right. In fact, it's interesting you say, because when you see however many thousand mobile phones held up pointing at the screen and people staring into their viewfinder or the screen on the phone, you think, are you really experiencing it in the same way?
Exactly, yeah.
Sometimes you just put the phone away and just immerse yourself into what's going on in front of your very eyes, and that very visceral experience you get. But hey, I mean, there's neither here nor there. But I think you're right. There's something, a shared experience, isn't there, about being there for something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a billion things we could talk about, but I did want to make sure to ask you about L.A. Noire, which is this 1940s detective game set in L.A., and it is really one of the most brilliant games I've ever played, and it's so huge. And your music, I wanted to make sure to tell you the main theme in particular. I work part time at a coffee shop, and I play that music so frequently, and
cool,
it almost never fails to get a response from someone. People are like, oh wow. I'm like, people say, oh, what is this? And I just wanted to make sure to tell you, I not only do I play it frequently, but someone always asks about what it is. So
that's very nice to hear. Thank you. Yeah. Well, to be strictly accurate and put the matter straight for all the right reasons. The music actually, for the most part, was written by Andrew Hale, no relation, funnily enough. And he's a great musician and a long-time friend of mine. And he was writing music for that show. And he got me involved to do some orchestration on it, which was fine, and sort of give it various orchestral colours and sounds. And we did a session like that. And then the director, Brendan McNamara, who's an Australian, from Sydney, and he then said to me and to Andrew, but particularly to me, he said, what I really want to do is to record a sort of symphonic suite, if you like, just some music which stands alone by itself, of using the themes from the show and then maybe some other things, and then his sentence just kind of tailed off, and I thought, it's all gone quiet. So, okay, that's fine. That's clearly the brief. So I went, how many pieces are you thinking about? He goes, I don't know, 5 or 6, something like that. Okay. And how long? He goes, and he sort of shrugged his shoulders. And so I went, wow, great, okay. And I understood what he meant. But I went home, I remember thinking, what am I going to do? I could do anything. What am I going to do? I could do anything. And went through this sort of pointless loop for I don't know how long it was. Then I thought, just sit down and write some music. Which is, so it's amazing. So actually, as well as the orchestral colours on the main theme and various other things that you can hear that I did, there are a few pieces on there which were done from the orchestra perspective, and we recorded them all live. We went into Studio One Abbey Road, which is a beautiful room, and had about, I think 36 players or something like that, I think, and basically played everything live.
Wow.
Which was fantastic. So that was wonderful to be able to. And of course, the great thing is that nobody in the world before the point of the beginning of the session had heard anything at all.
Right.
The last thing that Brendan had ever heard was the conversation with me going, yeah, sure, and going away, then scratching my head. But at that point, went in, and we had the really exciting moment of suddenly going, here it is, and hearing something that the musicians had never seen. No one else had ever heard any demos or anything else like that, not really explained. They just go, okay, do what you think is right. So I did all that, and that was really, really fun, and it kind of fits in with the other music. And then so Andrew was very kind to then, co-credit me as composer, because I'd done such a lot of extra stuff as part of the project. So, I'm very, very delighted. Obviously, then it won a BAFTA for original music, which was amazing. But it was a beautiful experience to be trusted so much and to be given space without being controlled, because it was as I just explained, a very vague brief, to say the least.
Yeah.
But not in other ways. It was more a question of being given space and being trusted, which is very special. So that's kind of how that came about.
Yeah. And that, I mean, the 1940s, 1950s is an era that I love, and whenever I play that game, it always makes me want to go and watch more film noir than I already do.
Yeah.
And was that in your mindset when you were going about it, or were you drawing from other areas?
Well, I mean, yeah, you always draw from other areas in your own eclectic experiences.
Sure.
You can't help it. Yeah, we certainly listen to. There's some fantastic music. I'm trying to think. I mean, LA Confidential. This is movies, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Taxi Driver. Take You, Pelham 123. I can't remember the other reference. A Bullet. Actually, that's a bit later. So yeah, but I mean, just some things. You just kind of listen to some stuff, and then I try and get away from it once I've got it. Okay, you get a sort of a world in your mind rather than just referring back because it becomes too specific then. So it was just amazing to go, okay, this sort of sound world, this color, this concept, and then to follow your instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful experience. I don't know if you played it on a PS2 or what the other platform it was on was the Xbox.
Yeah. I played it on, I guess I've played it recently on Xbox. I may have originally played it on PlayStation though.
Okay. So when you boot it up on the PlayStation, there's a bit of there's like a piano loop that just goes round.
Right.
So a solo piano thing. And that I did in lunchtime and said, I just want to play this particular thing. I'm just going to play it. And they said, okay, go ahead. And I played that once, I think, maybe twice. And it's just a little solo version of one of the orchestral pieces. But it was just a bit of extra color. Let's just try that. And it ended up being used as that kind of banner as on an endless loop effectively. I've seen people on YouTube saying, I just put this on and turn it on and let it go around and get all relaxed,
Yeah, for sure. And what is kind of cool, I mean, thinking about, you've talked about, theater and you kind of have to be there to experience it, but it is also kind of cool, to have these recordings and you're kind of able to share and connect with people, like in my living room, I can play, LA Noire and hear, your music or Andrew's music or whoever's music.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of a cool connection you can have that you may never know happens, but it's there.
Yeah, you're right, of course. And you're always conceiving something with a view to initially for the performer to get what it is and then to communicate to a listener or a watcher or whatever it might be, an appreciator of that art, as you say, someone's living room, somebody's theatre, whatever it might be. You're trying to tell a story, whether that's for a video game, in a song, on a record, or as a part of a theatre piece. It doesn't matter. It's still trying to communicate emotion and expression and narrative.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I could talk about LA Noire for hours. I did want to ask you about this collaboration you had with Sam Smith, the Writing on the Wall song for Spectre, the James Bond film. How did that collaboration come about? Because that's a huge film and a huge song.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can take that. It's quite interesting, I think, actually, in terms of career path of musicians, which is a nice story for anyone young who thinks about how do I do this, how do I do that. So I did my solo album in 1992, played it to a bunch of people, got asked to do string arrangements for one record, and then, as I then explained earlier, then somebody heard it, then passed my name to somebody else, goes to da-da-da-da-da. And Jamiroquai was one of those. So I did the first album with him, Travelling Without Moving, in 96. And then there was a British artist called Lamar who was making a record. And the record company said, we want some strings and brass on this, that kind of Jamiroquai kind of sound. And the engineer, Steve Fitzmaurice, said, why don't you get the guy who did that? Simon, he's a friend of mine. So, okay. So then they got in touch with me. And I did some songs for Lamar and a few things. And that began a relationship, sounds like a long story, but it's not really, with the A&R folks who now work for Capitol Records, Nick Raphael and Joe Charrington. And they asked me to do lots and lots of work over the years with their different artists, one of whom is this new artist called Sam Smith, but before his first record. It's hard to imagine, of course, but it's not that long ago. And so I did strings on 5 or 6 songs on that first album, I think. And then for a fair few more on the second record. And then they got in touch with me and said, this was, seriously hush-hush at the time because, of course, it wasn't announced. I don't know if they'd been approached or if they'd pitched. I don't know. Anyway, they said he's got a song that he and Jimmy Napes had written to pitch for Spectre as the theme. So, but it was only piano and vocal. And then they said, we want to pitch it to the film production company as a Bond song. Do you think they'll get it? And I said, well, not really, because it sounds like piano and vocal, which it did. And it's great, fantastic vocal, great piano, great song. But it still sounded like it sounded. And of course, if you're going to pitch for something like that, you need to make it sound, it needs to be obvious. So to their infinite credit, they then paid for a demo session with an orchestra. So I did the orchestration, the arrangement. We recorded it with about 45 players, and we did a demo, effectively. Then they played it to blah, blah, blah. And of course, the rest is history. They did get the gig. And I don't know if that made a difference or not. It doesn't really make any odds now. But it sounded like it sounded. And then we re-recorded with 50 or so. And Sam Mendes came down for that session. And that ended up being the master. But in terms of, actually, it was a similar kind of thing to the L.A. Noire thing for me. I had to then scratch my head thinking, I've grown up listening to James Bond music, and John Barry, of course, is sadly passed away, but another English musician. And I really always enjoyed his music and the sense of what he did, in a very original and personal sound. So I'm thinking, how do I do this without sounding cheesy or corny or cliched or too obvious? I think it needs to say what it's saying in terms of, I talked about narrative earlier, it has to have the right narrative and the right characterization. But I don't want it to sound like it's just a pastiche bit of, So It took me a little while to get that in my head. I remember just one Sunday morning, I said to my wife, I was just kind of thinking about it, the opening phrase, da-da-da, because he sings, da-da-da-da-da, and I just extended that, da-da-da-da-da, a little bit in the orchestral, and then I added the major seventh, da 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 da, which I think also just gives it that little bit of that Bond color. But it was a big weight of responsibility to think, wow, this is going to be. Actually, to be fair, at first I didn't know it was going to happen. I never really believed it until it was really there.
Sure.
But to have worked on a Bond song is pretty special. I'll always be very grateful. And then when he did the performance at the Oscars.
Oh, yeah.
2016 was before, and of course it did win that night, but we didn't know when we did the performance it was going to. And I was conducting the orchestra down in the pit.
Oh, wow.
And Jimmy was on stage and Sam was on stage. We couldn't see each other directly because there's a big lip that overhangs the orchestra pit in that theatre. So I had to watch on a screen. They had to see me on a kind of screen on the top of the mez. So it was all quite difficult. There's no click track. It's all live. And of course, it just has pickups into choruses. It holds on and goes, boom, da, da, da. It has natural ebb and flow, which is beautiful, but slightly more nervy. When you're thousands of miles from home with Los Angeles' finest musicians in front of you and live streaming to goodness knows how many people. But anyway, it all went well. But so that was a really special thing to be asked to do, to be involved, and that's how it happened, though, through doing arrangements, string and brass arrangements for records, which had then happened through doing my own record, my own album. So I can trace back exactly had I not done my record for all 300 copies that it sold, it would not have put me in the position where X, Y, and Z led to something else. Yeah.
You never know.
You never know. And it just goes to show that actually it's really important to, and that's not a question of me going out and massively self-promoting myself or being pushy or anything else. That was just doing what I wanted to do, chatting about it, being who I am. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is all way before the internet or social media, let alone mobile phones. I mean, we talk about 1995, it's a long time back. But one thing leads to another. And if you're, good at what you do and you have something, things do happen. It's just, you have to just do it and be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds cheesy, but you won't ever regret trying your hardest at something. Especially if it's a piece of art, a song, a film, whatever it is. It's like, even if it never comes to, even if it never goes to the Oscars or something, that doesn't mean it's not a worthy piece of art or it wasn't worth doing.
Absolutely right. And of course, it might be worthy, in hindsight, looking back, it might be that it led to another song or led to another thing, collaboration. You simply never know.
Yeah.
But it is all important, but it's just important to be honest and true to what you think, rather than thinking, this is what I think somebody else will want. That's not really, I mean, you have to be sympathetic to clients and collaborations and projects, but still you've got to be honest to yourself as well. And feel good about what you're doing, because otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah.
It's a great Dylan quote. My wife gave me one before one of the Girl from North Country openings, actually. And he just said, all I can do is be me, whoever that is.
Yeah. No,
that's great. For every single artist, we don't know. I mean, why can you tell John Williams from Mozart, Picasso from Degas, because they have style, they have a certain characterization of what they do.
Yeah.
And that means that they use repeat things, perhaps you could say. It doesn't matter, because it's choices, isn't it? Why is that note better than the other? Why is that word better than the other? I don't know. Nobody knows why you make those choices. You just feel instinctively that something's right or wrong. Yeah. And you have to be honest to that gut reaction. When you're editing the hell out of my blatherings at some point later on. Trust me, you will be. You're going to make decisions on what you think is important for what I'm saying about me, but also for what you want to put across to your listeners. And then you'll make those choices according to your ethic and your artistic values, and they are exactly as they should be. And those decisions are your decisions. And so it's not a question of one thing is more bigger or smaller or more valuable than something else. It's not. We all make decisions on what we do every day. And it's just important to be honest and follow those instincts, because we don't know why we have those instincts, but they are there and they're really solid.
Yeah. No, it's well said. Well, Simon, it's so nice talking to you. Is there, and thank you. Is there anything else in particular that I haven't touched on, or anything recent that you would like to discuss, or have I touched on things that, or have we covered?
I think we've covered loads of things, actually. What's the overall tone of your show? Who are you talking to? What's your output been historically? Are you talking to musicians? Obviously it's a podcast, so anyone in the world can listen to it, but.
Well, so my first podcast that I still do weekly as well is the Film Buds, and that's a movie review show. Okay. And so I kind of have this being the brother or sister to that shows. And really, I think the cool thing is with this show and that show, it's really varied. I have people who have been listening to interviews who have told me, oh, wow, I didn't know this thing about composing or this or that. But then I also have heard recently from a composer on social media that he says he's a composer and he loves hearing other composers talk and learning about the process. And so I think I'm very lucky to have people of all ages and kind of all over the place. So it's kind of cool.
Well, I can understand that, because, it's the kind of thing where you don't tend to meet people who do the same thing as you, because if it's a one person type job like composing is, or orchestrating, or you won't tend to have 6 of you in the room at the same time for obvious reasons. So I completely understand how people find that. I find it interesting when you listen to somebody else's process. Yeah. One thing I don't think this is relevant or interesting, but I'll put it out there anyway.
No, please.
Why I was doing a show. It was a production of Sondheim's Company over here. And it was only this second musical I'd orchestrated. And obviously it's been done originally by Jonathan Tulip, but we were doing a new production with a slightly different tone and colour, which was fun. But it wasn't a massive budget. It was a small regional theatre in the north of England, and great bunch of folks, but, there wasn't a lot of money around. So that's fine. So I worked out that I couldn't really afford to pay a copyist on this to do the normal kind of what they would do, because it would just take most of my fee, and I was spending a lot of time doing it, and it didn't make any sense. So, well, the only way I can make this work is if I do the writing straight into software myself. Now that sounds really kind of, a lot of people in their 20s or 30s would have just started off doing that no matter what. That's how they would begin composing or writing. No, I didn't. I'm 56 years old now, and I started off with pencil and paper. And I've got as I said earlier, I've got perfect pitch. I hear things in my head. Then I think about, what about if the piccolo played that? What about that was an octave lower? If we do the trumpet here with the harmony, those questions are going on internally in my mind about decisions. It's like painting a picture.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll go, okay, right, I know what I want to do. Then I'll put it into either commit pencil to the paper, or nowadays the mouse to the screen, effectively. Now, I don't listen to anything through the computer. I don't hear any sounds. It's all internal in my brain. I'm just seeing something on a screen. I will listen through maybe at the end just to kind of proofread, make sure that there's no obvious mistakes that I've missed. But I don't use it as a writing tool like that. It's purely as like a word processor, really,
sure.
I guess, for an author. So my difficult challenge that I went through was to think, how do I go from the very obvious physical process of making marks on a piece of paper, where you can see it's empty, I've done nothing. It's full of notes, I've finished. That's a really obvious thing. If any high school student with you go and do an exam where you're going to write down, you start at the top right-hand, in Western writing, you start at the top left-hand corner, you work your way down. When you get to the bottom right-hand corner and all the lines are filled, you fill that page, you turn it over. I know that sounds blindingly obvious, but with music, it's when you look at on a screen, you look at notated, whether it's Finale, Sibelius, Dorico, whatever software you're using, you look at the empty staves on the screen, they look identical to empty bars, or tacit bars, I should say. So how do you know if you just haven't decided what to do for the trumpets in that bar, or if you decided that they're not going to be playing? They both look the same.
Yeah.
And if your mind darts around from one bit to another, doesn't necessarily start at A and work your way all through the alphabet, as mine does, you might suddenly go, oh, I know what I want to do at that particular lyric there, or that instrumental 4 bars. I can see that straight away. You're going to write that bit down, because while it's in your mind, while it's fresh, you follow your instinct. You go, now, where was I in that second verse? Oh, you can't necessarily remember. And it's not on a piece of paper. You make scribbles, you write flute question mark, ... It's like making a shopping list. It's just really, where's my pen and paper? You write something down really quickly as it comes to your brain. So I've found it very difficult to think, how do I make this screen imagery look tactile and physical? So my way of solving that problem, as I say, a fair few years ago, and I do it all the time now, and I'm very happy, is I use in Sibelius, the software I use.
Oh, yeah.
I put a small highlight on each bar. The stock color is a bright, luminous yellow, like those kind of highlighters you use to mark up PDF now, but or a physical piece of paper. So it's like that. And of course, a key click shortcut you can put in really quickly. I use a very light gray, actually, so that each bar for the entire score has got these highlights across them. So I can see that they're pending, if you like, a bit like an in-tray of music. So you go, okay, if this is what I want to do here, actually, I don't want the woodwinds to play for those 8 measures. So I simply select those 8 measures, and I've got a shortcut where I delete all the highlights. So it's not even a second. It's a really, really quick process. And okay, then it suddenly looks empty and clean. I know I've dealt with that. I've made a decision of what that's going to be. In this case, nothing. And of course, you can leave them in if you want to. You can put them in and out. But what it does is, for me, if I'm dotting around from the beginning to the middle to the end, where was I in that? Oh, yeah, I can see there. Or little sticky notes you can put in, little comments. So I found a way to making software very tactile. That's a kind of strange word to use, but I think it's really important, because otherwise you need our brains, the way that we see things with our eyes and we recognize that we need to see shapes and images. It's not just dry. It's not binary. It's deeper than that. So I had to find a way that made sense for me to do, and that's how I do it. And of course, now I would never go back, because it's just a wonderful ability to be able to change things, change keys, join things together, make new transitions without having to suddenly get an eraser out and then try and write something in neatly enough for somebody else to read quickly, etc. So that was an interesting analog to digital transition that I had to go through. But the reason, it's a fairly obvious reason why I did it, but it was how I did it and how I made it feel. Yeah, it was important. And as I say, if you've grown up, that's all you've got. That's what you'll do, and you'll understand. But I still think if you're thinking visually, and orally inside your head about music. You need to know what it looks like and what and how it looks, what that will sound like.
Right.
Because if you don't know those things, you need to learn and need to listen and to practice, because otherwise you will have problems with real musicians, and you'll give them things which are potentially unplayable or certainly unidiomatic, which is not a good place to be. You need to be thinking about, one bit of advice I'd give to younger writers is think about the musician at the instrument and the musician involved in playing it. What's involved in making that sound? How do they set up? What's the posture? Where do they breathe? How do they move the bow? It doesn't mean you need to play them. I can't play the tenor saxophone, you know, or xylophone. I'll have a go, but you know what I mean. You need to watch and listen and see how a sound is produced. It's like easy with a singer, because you look, you breathe in, you do this, but how do they support the note? How is vibrato controlled? What do syllable differences make within the context of singing at different registers? And all those things for arranging, orchestrating, and writing as well, composer. It's vital that you have that in your mind, because otherwise, you write differently for a snare drum than you write for a piccolo. Duh. Yeah. I mean, that sounds so obvious.
No.
But if you're playing off a MIDI keyboard and you just bring a sound up, you don't necessarily understand the physicality of how that sound will be produced by a person. And then thinking about what the music looks like on the page. Not quite as flippant as my Phil Collins quote, but still, the first thing a musician coming in when they're going to sight read some music, whether it's for a session or a rehearsal or whatever, performance, they're going to look. The first thing they do, they'll get in, they'll put their instrument case down, and I guarantee they'll go straight to the stand and they'll look at the music. What have I got in front of me? What sort of a challenge is this? Is this hard to play, easy to play? Does it make sense? Is it clear to me what is instructed? And then there'll be a few seconds, but you can tell instantly in that moment whether something is written well for the instrument or not written well. Mm-hmm. And, if you were to write, high trumpets going for 5 minutes, no human being in the world can do that. I mean, I'm being extreme, but you know what I mean. So you have to think, okay, that's what I want. I need to find a way of making it work. Do I need more players? Do I need to give them a break? Do I need to transfer it to another instrument? How can I satisfy the effect that I want without them hating me? And it's sounding no good. Because if you give a musician a problem, they're going to do their best to fix it, but within the confines of what the instrument will sustain.
Yeah. No,
I think that relationship is really important to always consider.
Yeah, I mean I guess it's that tactile mentality is always important, because I mean, even though I grew up using computers very young, it's like I still, whenever I can, I want to use a pen and paper, because it makes more sense. Although of course, a computer and other digital technology have many strengths. It's like you have to know how it's going to sound or how it's going to appear, because I can play a song that was made by a person and then play another song, and you can immediately tell if it's an artificial piece. It's like you just know automatically, and so you can't ever really replace the real thing.
No, it's true. So you have to think, how can you tell? Why can you tell? And then you can perhaps break that down in specific examples, case by case. But I think you're right. You get a very instinctive reaction to think that doesn't quite feel right. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Whether it's a range thing or a tonality or a stylistic thing, it could be anything. But there's always a reason for what sounds convincing or not.
Yeah. Well, Simon, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk.
It's a pleasure.
And you're welcome back whenever you would like. If you have another project come along, we'd love to get you back on sometime.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, can I listen to your show in the UK?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's available everywhere. It's and I can send you some links to it as well. So
amazing. That'd be really good. I can when I'm walking my dog, I can listen to your show and think about conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, everybody. I think that is about it for the show this week. Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your way out. Thank you very much. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Music Buds. Check out themusicbuds.com. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we'll see you next time.